Hello everyone and welcome back to the Rogue Monkey podcast and season 5. We've got another inspiring array of interviews lined up for you, ranging from entrepreneurs to Premier League footballers, from Emmy Award winners to war veterans. It's going to be another awesome season. But before we get started, please make sure you are subscribed to our community update, which gives you free monthly content, exclusive insights, behind the scenes podcast news, and a book review, all in the theme of inspiring others to challenge themselves and chase their dreams. The link to the community update is in the show notes. We'd also appreciate a quick rate and review as it helps capture your thoughts on our conversations. On to today's discussion, and we're going on a journey that explores what it means to win. Our guest today is a triple Olympian, Olympic medalist and world champion in the sport of rowing, but our conversation ventures far beyond sitting in a boat. Today we're really excited to welcome Cath Bishop to the show and explore the phrase, the long win. Our discussion is a real montage of lessons from Cath and her journey from the Olympic cauldron through to working as a diplomat in war zones that has culminated in a truly inspiring book aptly titled The Long Win. Whether you're studying, leading a business, managing a team, or just looking to understand to a greater level what we mean by winning, the book and our discussion today will no doubt raise some challenging questions and really get people thinking. So, without further ado, let's get into it and season 5 of the Rogue Monkey podcast, episode 33, The Long Win and the Search for a Better Way to Succeed, a conversation with Cath Bishop. Hello Cath, welcome to the show. How are you?
Yeah, great to be here. Thanks for inviting me. All good, thanks.
Fantastic. Thanks for sharing some time with us today. We're excited to explore your very fascinating journey over the next half an hour or so. But to get us started, give our listeners and viewers a little bit of an introduction as to who you are and kind of your headline journey.
Sure. So I'm probably, from your perspective, coming on because of my sporting background. But I had 10 years as an Olympic rower, going to 3 Olympic Games with a mixture of results and a mixture of experiences that kind of made me query what high performance environments are like and what maybe how they might improve. I then had a career as a diplomat for 12 years, working in the Foreign Office on political negotiation roles primarily, and working in some conflict affected parts of the world. And I now work in leadership development, a variety of running workshops, facilitating, teaching at business schools, and recently wrote a book, The Long Win, kind of drawing some of the lessons across all of those different worlds together.
I think it's really interesting we mentioned that straight from the start, because I first came across you at Steve Ingham's conference what feels like a lifetime ago. I think it was probably about 2 years ago now, maybe, I'm not sure. But it was a while back, and you obviously tried to condense, I guess, the lessons of your experiences down to like a 1 hour talk. And it was one of those talks you came away from like, I'd love to have a 2 hour, 3 hour, 4 hour conversation with you. And then this book came out. I was like, looking at it going, this is awesome. I'd love to explore this with you in person. So obviously here we are. So let's kind of wind it right back to, before all the Olympics and before all of that started. Where did your journey kick off in this world of sport and becoming a diplomat?
So I always wanted to become a diplomat, or from a kind of late teen, sixth form kind of phase. I was just fascinated by it, and I still am. I think the world of foreign policy is just unbelievably, compellingly interesting. It's complicated, it's very dynamic, and it's hard to explain because it actually comes down to a whole lot of human behavior. It's about our mindsets and all of the crazy things that have happened over centuries that have got us to this point. When you look at the map of the world, you would never rationally set it out how it is. But that is what's happened because of all the millions of humans involved over time. And I just find that fascinating to think, why are things as they are and how can we improve them on a scale where this stuff matters? This is about quality of life. This is about how we enable communities, societies to thrive. So I've always been really captivated by that. And I really wanted to explore whether I could create a career in that world. But that went on hold when at university I took up rowing. So I wasn't very sporty at school. I couldn't run that fast, didn't do a lot of activities, fitness or anything really as with my family. So I probably wasn't that fit. And I felt quite pigeonholed as not a very sporty kid, a bit tall, a bit uncoordinated in my teen years probably. So I nearly didn't start to row at university because I thought, oh, I don't want to do that. That looks full on and involves getting up early in the morning. But through pure chance, I got roped in to fill in when somebody was injured one day, and just to literally be the eighth bottom on a seat in a rowing crew. And it really transformed my experience of sport on the spot. I had absolutely no aspirations to be an Olympian whatsoever, but I loved being in a rowing boat. I loved being on the water. I loved that challenge of trying to do your best, all the time aware that it had to work for the people around you, had to be in time with them, and all the time aware of the environment you were doing it in, i.e. on the water, and having to think about how the weather is affecting what you're doing. And that experience was a great one that kind of just really made me feel alive. Something was constantly changing and required you to be all the time developing. And for me, it stayed a great analogy really for constantly trying to develop understanding what being in an effective team means, and something that I've thought about in the context of work environments and the leadership development work I do now. So it was a great journey that started off by just really, encountering a sport that I loved and that brought camaraderie at a level I hadn't experienced before. And then over time, it turns out that I did have potential and talent and the physiology that enabled me to get to some of the highest levels, and then experience sort of sport in this very full-on, intense, elite world.
Just before we dive into some of those experiences, I think it's fascinating in the challenges we've had over the last few years of young athletes potentially getting exposed to performance level sport too early. It's, I think, really powerful for people out there to hear that somebody at the age of 18 went to university and picked up a sport for the first time and ended up going to 3 Olympic Games. And obviously it's different from sport to sport, but I think often that message doesn't get shared enough, that actually at 15, you don't need to have your heart set on exactly what you want to do. There are still doors that can open.
I feel really passionately that that's important. And I think beyond sport, not getting pigeonholed at school, that what you're good at, what you're not good at isn't helpful. Certainly this push for talent at a very early age makes no sense. We clearly miss people because we're all on a very different development curve. It absolutely makes no sense to be pushing for that. It also makes no sense to exclude people from sport at whatever level they choose to access it from, because that's not good for healthy lives, for people who maybe will become volunteers in sport later. It's not just about becoming an elite athlete either. It's about, connecting with the sport, the community that it brings, and the way in which you might contribute as an athlete, as a coach, as a volunteer, as an umpire. Who knows? Why would we want to cut any of those paths off to anyone?
But some of, I guess, the language you were using there when you first fell into the sport, quite literally into the seat, was around the experience of it. So at what point when you started to move into, I guess, the more professionalized world of sport, were there cracks emerging, if you like, or red flags or whatever they were that you were kind of like, this isn't what I signed up for? Or was there anything that kind of just made you question it quite early? Or do you remember a single moment, or is it just kind of gradually crept up on you?
So I remember early on quite a few red flags that actually I encountered, or I explained as my deficiencies. So I remember people saying, you've got to be really serious now. If you want to become a serious athlete, that means you've got to be totally dedicated. That means you've got to win you've got to try and win all the time. And if you lose, you can't be happy about that, because that's not how we behave. If you want to be a winner, you've got to show that you hate losing and it's awful. And, and I would see that sort of behavior, this sort of grief and this sort of, I want to be a winner, so I've got to hate losing. And a lot of these things felt a little bit, didn't quite sit easily, but I thought, that's because I've not learned how to be a winner yet, because I'm naive, because I'm still quite new to sport. I haven't learned this psychology. And again, there was a lot of a talk about the will to win. When I joined the rowing team, the women's team had yet to win any Olympic medals, and there was this doubt, there was this question mark over whether the women could win. I thought, that's really odd. Isn't that kind of what we're here to find out? And surely it's going to happen at some point, isn't it? It can't be that we're sort of innately incapable of winning. But there was this sort of mythical, judgments made about who's got the will to win and who hasn't. So we're within the Olympic team. These are the best people in the country, and we're still talking about winners and losers here. I thought, gosh, that's really uncomfortable. And of course, my God, I really don't want to be pointed out or kind of defined as one of those people who isn't going to win. So I better try and do what everyone's talking about. And spend a lot of time trying to think, have I got will to win? Is it big enough? Is it great enough? Is it strong enough? How do I know? How do I find out? And all the time I got sucked into that, I wasn't learning how to go faster in my rowing boat. I wasn't learning how to improve, how to develop my mindset in a more helpful way, performance focused way. I was sort of caught up in this macho narrative. So although it didn't sit easy, I kind of thought, oh, well, that's because I haven't learned it yet. It's because I've got to learn how to do this. And actually looking back, I wish I'd, said, oh, I'm not sure about that. Let me just work out what I need to do to perform, what I need to fulfill my potential, and try and define that path a little bit more myself.
Do you find that, and obviously you've done lots of speaking before to different groups, do you find that there's almost this mythicism, if you like, of aspiring young athletes that think exactly what you said there, to get to the top, whatever sport it is, I must do X, Y, and Z, instead of actually it's a journey and your path is your path to get there, and who you are is the superpower, if you like. Having met a number of very high level athletes, they're all successful, but they're all successful because they're themselves at their absolute best, if that makes sense. So I think, like you said, it's that pigeonholing, and there must have, it's almost unfathomable for somebody who's not been through, I guess, that experience to go, you went to 2 Olympics and the experience, the negative experience was what you took away from it. And we're not talking about positions and stuff. I know obviously there was some stuff associated with that, but the whole experience of being an Olympic athlete and getting to that level twice and then going, it didn't quite cut it. And that's a really interesting dynamic, because I think TV makes a great job of it. We have however many medals we get this summer, 60, whatever it is, and we parade them all on TV, and great job. But it's like, hold on, whoa. That's the tiniest percentage make it to those games in the first place. And you've got people who have dedicated their whole life to even making a team, going up against teams that perhaps have 10 times the budget. They come 4th or they come 10th or whatever it is. Oh, no, we're not going to talk about them. And it's like, what? So it kind of just turns this whole concept and mythicism around what it means to be an elite athlete on its head. And that's kind of what I felt reading the book, is it makes sense, but no one talks like that in sport, or traditionally no one spoke like that in sport.
Yeah, I think that encapsulates really well the lens that I'm trying to bring to the sporting world, and this sense of what does success look like? What do we want to depict? And if we only have those images of people on the podium, then that's incredibly narrow, because it matters how they're feeling when they're on the podium. And what I found in my research in the book that astonished me, that so many people who won were feeling flat and empty and even depressed. How can that be possible when this is the moment of utter fulfillment? This is why you're miserable when you lose, because when you win, then life is sorted forever and you're happy forever. And this kind of crazy fairy tale binary world that we start to depict success in, it's not helpful, because it isn't like that. And so the more we can start to create a much more colourful picture of what sport is around, that's about, yes, experience is a word I like, that you've picked up on a lot. It matters how we win the medal, because that determines what happens in the races thereafter, or what happens in the next part of life. That's what we take with us. It's great to have a medal. I have no problem with people pursuing that. I loved, that opportunity to try and pursue a medal, but it's important the framework within which we situate it. That winning, that pursuit of winning, is situated in the framework, has a wider meaning that lasts beyond whether you win it or not. That are the things that you take with you from that experience into the next part of your life. That are the things that you feed back into the sport, find a way to contribute, inspire the next generation. And it's all about how it happens. I mean, most recently and most heartbreakingly in the gymnastics world, we hear those stories of, athletes like Emmy Tinkler saying she would hand back her medal in Rio if she could change the experience she had on the way. That's, the perfect example of what success does not look like, how a medal doesn't always equal success in a meaningful way. So we need to then have more than a medal as our terms, as our measure of success. We need to have the story that goes with the medal, the ups and the downs. I mean, of course, it's not going to be a happy, easy time to be an elite athlete, But those challenges can actually be, a huge part of how you develop that resilience that others connect to, that then others can feel, actually, I can achieve this. I can link into that too, because it's going to involve setbacks. It's going to involve disappointment, but it's also going to involve this constant learning, this constant growth, this exploration of what's possible. And results are one way in which I will be tested and in which that development will be measured. But actually, I will take a whole lot of things from that, beyond that medal with me. When I came back from my third Olympics, the sports psychologist asked me a question that was really helpful in moving my thinking on. He said, what will happen if you don't win a medal at this third time? So I'd come seventh and I'd come ninth. Nobody's going to put their mortgage on me winning a medal at this point if you look at the evidence side of it. And if you look at the odds for anyone, there are so many external factors involved. But it seemed heretical to ask that question. I mean, I didn't want to win any less. And the reason I came back was because I thought there were some different approaches, some different things that I could do that would help me potentially get a better performance. But it was by really him helping me focus on what are those things? What are you gaining if you don't win on this third occasion? That then enabled me to think about the kind of broader picture of the experience of, I can learn how to manage pressure better. I can learn how to develop my mindset. I can learn how to look after myself in tough times. That recovery and self-care piece is really important to being able to withstand this at times very brutal environment. And I can learn to work with others, to understand what teamwork is, and to explore, how I can connect and bring out my strengths and play to our collective strengths. A whole load of things that are things I'm gaining on a daily basis. Even when I'm not top of the rankings, even when those things aren't working, I'm still moving forward. And by focusing on all of those things, shining the light on those things, what happens? My performance starts to improve. I mean, I'm able to create an environment where other things are valued, but all of these other things, they feed into that performance as well. They take the pressure off that sense of I've got to win whatever, to I need to bring all of what I've learned, the physical, the mental, the emotional, all of the stuff that I'm preparing as an athlete. I've got to bring that and see how well I can do. And the difference of sitting on a start line saying, God, I've got to win this race. I mean, that's a horrible place to be. It makes you tense. You're driven by fear of losing. The difference between that and sitting on an Olympic start line thinking, okay, I'm going to bring my best and see what happens. I'm going to play out. I'm going to try and execute everything I've been preparing for hours, 6 hours a day, 7 days a week, 49 weeks of the year. And then at the end, we'll see what that gets me. And then we'll take a look and then we'll go again for the next time. And it's liberating. You want to give it a go. You want to try and bring your best and then, let the result take care of itself. That approach I found so helpful to unlocking performance. And then that was the route to results.
I think there's been a whole shift as well over perhaps the last 4 years in narrative, maybe because I guess of some of the scandals that have happened and the reviews and things like that. But, a couple of years after to Rio, one of my friends retired. He'd competed at 3 Olympics, third Olympics, got a medal. And we were away on a surf trip. And I said to him, we were just, in the pub having a chat about the different experiences. And he said to me, by far, London was my best experience. And I'm like, you got Olympic medal at your last games. You were a world champion. But your best experience was actually the home games. And he went, because of the experience. And you kind of knew it then, but I kind of took it in its own little world at that point, didn't really apply that kind of thought process to the wider thing. And I think that's when, I've read the book and listened to some of the other discussions you've had on various shows. You're like, it's so blindingly obvious. And yet the tradition of, well, we've always done it that way, so why would we change? And depressingly, there is a very long list of broken athletes who get to the top of the cliff. Yes, they get their gold or their world record or whatever it is, and they fall off the cliff and actually saying, well, actually, this is more of a long, flat journey. And at some point, there may be a finish line that says Olympic medal, or it may be one that says junior or whatever it is. But you continue along that path. And I think that a lot of young people can feel like there is that kind of ta-da finish line. And when they get there, like you said, everything will be solved. And I guess, especially having got the medal, now, especially being a parent and, sports moved on a little bit. Do you look back and think of now that last 4 years differently? Now that you've done it, you've got the tick, but you did it in a better way. Has that completely changed everything for you?
Yeah, it was absolutely the beginning of long win thinking, if you like. It was the beginning of trying to define success on my own terms. So I no way got that far down that road because I was still within an environment that was shifting slowly, but it was a really vital change that I started to, for myself, think, what am I going to get from this experience, and what can I develop on a daily basis that will help me for whatever comes next. And to bank in those sort of gains, that sense of what I'm learning, that learning piece was just gives you momentum when the results aren't there. That helps you then, get to a place where maybe the results will come. I love that analogy you gave of climbing a mountain. I'm always really sort of struck. It reminds me by the Everest analogy that more people die on the way down than on the way up. And I think we're guilty of that in sport. It's all about getting to the podium, and the crash, the post-Olympic blues. There's almost an assumption that that's how it has to be, rather than, I wonder if we could do things differently that might lessen the crash we have after Olympics, rather than somehow saying, well, that's just part, sport's tough and that's part of the journey. I don't think it needs to be like that, because I think the crash comes from the moment on the podium being disconnected from the rest of your life that comes thereafter, having no meaning, not thinking about what does this medal mean, not in the moment, the picture on the podium, but then what? Then what do you do with it, or what it represents? How do you carry that with you? Because you carry that experience with you thereafter. I was really struck by Gareth Southgate, who he uses this concept of experience a lot. When he was talking in the last World Cup about the England team, he was asked by journalists, how are you going to do? What success look like? Is it getting out the group stages? Is it in the final, the semis? And he always answered using experience language, saying, I want this team and the support team, always both in the same breath, to have the best experience. I want them to thrive, and then we'll see what happens on the pitch. They can't control crossbars and referees and all of these other factors that will play a role. But what I can do as the leader of that, as the coach, is to enable my team to have a positive, thriving experience. And that, I think, for me, is something that I've carried on, that sense of what does a thriving environment look like in our workplaces? What does a thriving environment look like for athletes now in this next generation coming through? And that's part of my work. Supporting the True Athlete Project as well. And I kind of love what they do by creating this framework around the pursuit or the playing sport, where you add in values and identity and compassion in performance, that sense of social responsibility and mindfulness. They are providing that framework that I think is so important. And so that experience, it stayed with me, that, it's not about fixing individuals, making individuals into winners. It's as much all of our collective responsibility to create environments in which people can thrive. And then we'll see the results that come from that. Of course, not everyone can win. Some will, some won't. But actually, how can we thrive and take things that last beyond that moment when we cross the line, first or last?
I think as well, like a lot of the things you said there around transferability of lessons, whatever your experiences, and actually the world you went into after that, if people made a mistake in a swimming gala, a rowing lake, they come fourth. If people make a mistake in the line of work you went into afterwards, people die. So did that kind of almost reinforce it even more, that it was so important to have this much more holistic view in the way that we have conversations and develop and work with people? Because, to say, the next step you took on was arguably, it was more important. It carried more weight on the impact of the world. So what kind of lessons did you take when you did step away from sport finally into the kind of diplomatic world that, in the utmost seriousness, needed to be on point?
So I think I joined the Foreign Office after the second Olympics, and then took some time out, went part-time, and to go back for Athens for that third one. But even that time out, sort of the year or kind of 18 months that I was working there, the perspective that gave me was so helpful on going back. It was a key part of enabling me to go back, by seeing a bigger world, stepping back, seeing bigger issues and going backwards as fast as you can in a boat, which you really lose sight of. And that's, again, why it's so dangerous if we become this sort of over-professionalization of the Olympic and Paralympic world. Stops us having perspective. Perspective is a key part of resilience. It's a key part of enabling us to perform, managing setbacks along the way. So I think I took that into that performance, and I always had that sense that there was a world waiting after Athens, and that, again, was just hugely helpful to situate that performance and think, I want to give my absolute best. life will continue, and big, deeper, more important issues will continue after this point. I think you're right. I felt sort of very humbled by being able to get involved in the sort of world of international politics and all of the individual challenges in the countries where I worked. You know, you think what a privilege it is to do sport. How could we create an environment where an athlete loses sight of that, where it feels like life and death, where it feels so intense and so disturbing when things go wrong, when it's still fundamentally a privilege to play sport and to have the opportunity to see how good you can be. That again is you know, a reminder to me that we need to make sure our athletes have access to the outside world, to other things. It's not a distraction from what they're doing. It's part of enabling them to perform in a much more sustainable, meaningful way.
Do you think the last 12 months has been perhaps a reality check for some of the sports world, in the sense of, yeah, you can't access training, but actually there's 1,000 people a day dying at the moment, or whatever it is in whatever country you're in? Do you think that there may be some people who were sitting on the fence, or perhaps potentially exploring a wider, more holistic way of thinking, and now have perhaps come off the last 12 months and thought, you know, actually there probably are bigger things in the world? And I think is the danger, and it's a challenge, because the Olympics generally, or whatever professional sport it is, if it's not an Olympic sport, the pinnacle of that inspires youngsters. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's getting that message across that that's part of the journey. And actually, if you come 4th, 5th, 6th at an Olympic Games, and that's where you get to, you've had these incredible experiences along the way. You've had these tools that are going to set you up for life. And therefore, your trajectory post-sport is actually a lot greater, because you've gone through that experience. But I think we kind of, especially in the social media world and glitz and glamour and fame and money and all those sorts of things, it can get a bit lost that that's the moment and that's it. And it's like, no, that 10, 20, 30 years, however long your career is, that's the journey. That's the achievement, is that bit.
I agree with that. I wonder how much we'll take this opportunity to shift our perspective. We have definitely had a real catalyzing opportunity to see the world differently. And you know, in 2020, instead of having the heroes of the summer that year being people with medals around their necks, the heroes were people in gowns and nurses' clothing and PPE. I think that was so important to rebalance that and to think about, you know, how easily and how shallowly we use that sort of hero term in sport, and how unhelpful it is at times for the athletes and for the spectators. I think it's interesting that, you know, there are a lot of athletes who've taken this opportunity to take time out, even to have some space to get involved in their communities, because to create that meaning. And there's almost a sense, though, that it was, because we couldn't train because of the pandemic, there's a danger that we think, well, once lockdown finishes, then we don't need to do any of that stuff anymore. That would be a mistake, because actually what that showed is, you know, I hope, and certainly in the athletes I've spoken to, where they were, you know, able to make some meaningful contribution, that only gave them greater motivation. You know, it highlighted the social responsibility they have as athletes, the role models they can be, and we've seen that happening on a wider level than I think before. Whether it's Marcus Rashford, most obviously at the top of his game and most publicly doing things to help. We don't have to all be doing it on that level, but it just shows that high performance and you know, the bigger purpose, the social responsibility piece, they can absolutely sit together. So I think that's really important, and that needs to be part of our narrative about sport, which you still don't see. We see in the media, quite a narrow, in the traditional media, I should say, quite a narrow focus on the results, not the journey, not the experience. Every now and then there's a bit of a feature on a story, but far less than the features on the results. And when we tell stories to children in assemblies, when athletes come in, there can be this almost expected narrative that I think athletes feel they have to learn, that, you know, it's hard along the way and then you win. You're talking to an assembly of 400 kids, 600 kids. Well, it doesn't make sense to say that everybody's going to win. You can have a few setbacks and then you win. No, that's just not how the path of life goes, and nor need it to go like that. But we create this expectation, which actually then leads to huge sort of disappointment, confusion, sense of failure, when it's really all about what you're learning along the way and what you take with you. And the results will come for some, and for some they won't. And that won't be anything necessarily to do with their own effort. That will be to do with external factors that have such a role in outcomes that we achieve, whether it's in business or sport. And so I think, again, we need to be careful about the narratives that we are kind of telling to the younger generation, the sense of, if you do this, then you'll win, and then everything will be okay. No, it's just one of the things that you have the opportunity to gain from playing sport, is the opportunity to compete and to see how well you can do against those around you. But there are a whole lot of other things that are longer lasting than that moment when you cross the line, that are really important. And if you invest in those, you both improve the chances of crossing the line, ahead of others, but you also improve the chances of taking something from sport that has that longer lasting value for you in what other aspects of your life you get involved in thereafter.
I'm curious as well, because if you go back historically through sport, and especially like the society aspect, you look at the commercialization of it and how it lost its meaning, if you like, because it became more commercialized. But actually, the business world, where sport draws its commercial base, is going through that shift already of, gender equality. How are you getting, and where are you getting your staff from? How are you training them? What's their well-being? You're almost seeing the thing that's going to draw down into sport next is going through that shift because it has to. And that will be really interesting, where if sport is most sports are built on the commercial model, certainly at a professional level, while actually saying, well, if you're drawing from a world that's moved forward into the modern day and you're still doing it like you were 20, 30 years ago, do you have a place in this world? And I think you're going to see a lot of conflict come up, and you see it with the various governing bodies like globally that have had these scandals, and the resistance, especially modern day, because I can pick up a phone call and have a chat with you on the other side of the world, no problem at all. And you can mobilize and gain traction on these kind of things. So do you think there's going to be a tipping point, if you like, where actually the change of the commercial world is going to start drawing down commercial principles in sport?
Oh, it's interesting, isn't it? Because the commercial world itself is transitioning, and balancing there's, I think that, I don't know about a tipping point as a gradual evolution. There's a spectrum of how quickly companies are adjusting to understand the importance of environmental and social impact factors. There's no doubt those companies that are investing in those areas, and measuring and valuing those areas, are starting to outperform the others. But it takes time for that shift to happen. And I think what will happen is we'll almost broaden out the possibilities. So I hope that there will be, through social media, in a way, there's the opportunity to access sport in a different way, in a more immediate way. So just because you're not covered in the print media, which basically women's sport still is terribly undercovered in traditional print media, but there is a chance now that your sport can be accessed through streaming, through different means, and that, I think, will appeal to some different companies and potentially draw in again, some more innovative approaches. So innovation happens in the commercial world, and that is going to force sports to innovate slowly as well. But I think it's more of a kind of gradation across the piece. There is an opportunity for sport to be leading this, rather than waiting to be pushed to change. And I would love to see more of that thinking happening in the sports leadership of NGBs, where there's still that sort of short-term focus on results, focus on just getting a commercial sponsor in this year, rather than developing a partnership to think about how will people join our sport? How will they experience it in 10 years time, 20 years time? What do the youth, how do they encounter our sport? And, it's there as a concept, but it's still not really part of the day to day. And so that, I think there's that transition that's a kind of phase of overlapping increasingly the old way and the new way. And we've got to have both tracks going, until we can safely move forwards and see that we can let some of those things go quicker than we might realize.
So I guess, like, pulling all of those things together, there must have been a point for you where you thought, I've got all these ideas, I'm doing all these projects, I've learned all these lessons, had these experiences, I'm going to share that. So at what point with the book did it go from being a reflection, on a very up and down, if you like, career path of experiences, to actually, I'm going to share this, and now reflectively my takeaways, if you like, from that? Was there a moment, or did someone say something to you and you thought, okay, I'm going to do it? Or how did that come about?
It was years of reflecting and making sense of what did I get from that, and thinking, what was it, the things that other people thought I should get from that, and why did I do that? It was really years of that curious thinking of trying to understand what did I really learn from that, beyond the obvious stuff about how many races I won. What was that about? And then connecting that across the different experiences of workplaces, the diplomatic world. I'm thinking there are some commonalities here about how a narrow definition of success holds us back each time. It limits the experience we have, and then it limits the growth we have, and then it actually limits the results we get in the end. So the irony is that, my arguments for broadening our concept of success are absolutely not to diminish performance, but they're to create a broader platform on which to sustain performance over a longer period of time. And to value other things, within that bracket of performance. So, it's making sense, having lots of conversations in the business world most recently, where I've been working, and seeing again this language of winning playing out, and thinking, what's going on here? And what's happening in the behaviors? How are the teams operating in this organization? What's the dysfunctionality here? And tracing it back all the time. So it took me years to sort of unpick that, make sense of it, actually research it a bit more, explore some of the research that exists around organizational behavior, around sporting cultures and environments as well, and then slowly sort of tie that together. So it was, layered process of making sense of my own experiences, making sense of others' experiences around me, understanding the research, thinking about, a broad spectrum of social behavior around success. It's around schools. It's, we see it in the films we watch, we see it on the advertising. It's so dominant that, again, it took me a while to kind of unpick all that. And make sense of it and try and reshape it, think about how could we view this through a different lens. So the book itself took about 4 years to write, in between, life and work and family. It was in my head swirling around for probably a couple of years before that. And it was also a vehicle for me to stretch my own thinking. At times I think, well, hang on, this doesn't make sense. What am I saying here? And what am I challenging here? And do I feel confident enough to challenge it? It was a kind of real ongoing toing and froing in my own head, getting feedback from others to really stretch my thinking and try and create something that's helpful to others, that both unpicks the problem but also suggests how we might reframe things differently through the 3 C's of the long win, by clarifying things on a much broader way and over a longer time perspective. That constant learning approach in itself sitting at the heart of how we define success, and prioritizing the human connections in everything we do. We can't be successful alone. So why wouldn't we be prioritizing people much more on our daily basis and our calendars? And yet people tell me they always have to-do lists. People don't seem to figure on those to-do lists, and yet that's what's required in every endeavor, every project that we undertake. So, again, it was a layer by layer process, a bit like a sporting journey, ups and downs, moments of crisis, moments of breakthrough, and moments of huge connection with others around me as part of that process.
So I've read it a couple of times now, and it's having a finished piece, if you like, and you've made sense of the world and the journey you've been on so far. When you look forward, it almost kind of might feel like you've had that voyage, but actually the compass decides where it wants to go next. Do you feel like you've got things in the pipeline, or is there kind of this excitement in not knowing what's coming up next? Like, what does the future look like? And are there any things particularly coming up that you're happy to share?
So the book has been a lovely vehicle for connecting with others who are involved in shifting cultures, running leadership, thinking about leadership development, leaders in sport, coaches, teachers. So it's been a wonderful way to connect into, even more real life experiences. And, many others who get in touch with me about the book, they give me an insight into how they've applied it into their world. I was talking to an architect recently, talking about how it's sort of given her a completely different view on, they tend to have these highs and lows that they go for a pitch. And if they get the job, it's great. And if they don't, they kind of assume the pitch was rubbish and it's a terrible disaster, rather than this constant learning process that we have through races, win or lose. What are we learning? What's going well? What do we need to improve? And so, I'm loving that sense of giving me a deeper understanding of how we can apply long win thinking. So, part of my ongoing sort of constant rumination on all of these ideas is to think about, what do long winners look like in our environments? How can I amplify those, either through the work that I do or through more writing, and continuing to sort of research what does that look like to support organisations like the True Athlete Project in their world of changing environments for the better for athletes and coaches, and how can we also continue to persuade at the top level our leaders to believe in this shift that's required. We need to have that commitment to performance and well-being being part of one whole, not separate issues. And there's still a long way to go. So as always, I'm involved at all sort of different levels of activism within sport and business, the work I do, the kind of day job, if you like, around leadership programs, speaking work, and, always, at the moment, enjoying constant outreach connections with people who've read the book and said, this is what I think, this is what strikes me. And then asking me questions about, well, what about this? Because of course it's not an end point. The book, it sort of is to move my thinking on. I hope it helps others to move or engage with their own thinking. And then we have to kind of think, okay, well, how next? How can we implement this better? How can we explain this better? How can we bring this into more communities, more organizations?
So you just touched on the True Athlete project, and I'm a bit curious. I've done a bit of reading about it. Can you just kind of flesh that out a little bit more as some examples of kind of what they do and where that could be going forwards? Because it's really exciting to see these sorts of things emerging, because like you say, when you've suddenly got lots of people singing off the same sheet and getting behind projects like this, it actually starts to becomes more weight to it, if that makes sense. There's more of a narrative around it because people are like, well, what's going on here? So can you just kind of share a little bit about that?
Sure, yeah. Well, I absolutely love the work they do. And it was in the process of writing the book over the last couple of years that I got kind of much closer to them, because there's so much alignment between their philosophy and what I was writing about. So it's become very natural to kind of be an ally, to be supporting and helping advocate the work they do. The kind of key program they started off with, and still their center point, is this. It's a brilliant athlete mentoring program. It's a global athlete mentoring program that brings together, at the moment, the 2021 program kicked off in January with, I think, 64 mentors and mentees across 10 countries, 33 sports. That safe space to explore the wider meaning of a sporting journey. The curriculum along the way encourages them to have conversations about values, about their identity in sport and beyond sport, about bringing mindfulness into, as a huge theme of mindfulness practice to help understand that sporting journey, take that space to understand yourself, and again, develop that social responsibility thinking. And so, that sets up for me that, lovely framework within which to situate sport, elite or grassroots. They offer workshops in all of those areas to NGBs, working with coaches, working with schools around those areas. Some of the things that were traditionally absent in my initial experience of elite sport, that I think are so important to giving us that framework that will actually help us have longer careers, more fulfilling careers, have better stories to tell, want to stay in sport, give back to sport, and are more inspiring for I think a wider community of people to feel, I could be comfortable in this world of sport that's not just about kind of alpha, who wins, who's the strongest, who's the toughest, because that isn't actually the way to reach our potential. So, I love what they do, and they're a growing organization. Have a look at their website, the trueathleteproject.org. They're on Twitter, they're on Instagram, and I think you pretty quickly you can pick up a feel for what they're doing. And they're one of a variety of organizations, I think, who are looking to support sport in this way. And what we want is for this not to be an add-on, but actually to be part of how we plan sport, to make sure that anyone coming into the elite sporting world gets a mentor, that they have that safe space to discuss things in that much broader way, to develop fully and not sort of just see themselves as a sports machine, a sports robot. And I think we'll then have many, even greater role models coming out of sport, greater stories for more of us to connect to. I think we increase then the audiences, the people that we who want to come, the fans, the spectators, because it becomes more of a reflection of all of who we are and the lives that we lead, not just the kind of seemingly inaccessible role models that win a race and that appear on a podium and seem like gods. That's not helpful to them, and it's not helpful to anyone else.
I think, and it sits nicely, I guess, this discussion we're having, because over the last few seasons and the next one coming up, we spoke to a number of professional or retired professional athletes, and very successful both in terms of their performance goals, but if you like, in terms of their commercial opportunities that have come out of it. And they're still speaking quite openly around, I've really struggled with my mental health. This is really important. It's important to have balance. So I think it's hopefully nice, especially with this modern technology world we're in, from an accessibility point of view, for young athletes to see whoever it is in the lights, but the messages that are coming from that person are actually a much more balanced thing. So I guess looking back and not calling yourself a role model to yourself, but if you went back to your 10-year-old self and gave them a message based on everything you've kind of had so far, the highs, the lows, the wins, what would you say?
I say don't worry about whether you're going to win or not. That's really just a kind of a side product along the way. I think about what matters to you. Again, not take on these externally defined measures of exams and medals. Actually, to start at an earlier point to define what matters to you, and think about what's the experience you want to have going forward. What's the experience you want to have in whatever you do? Going back to 10, that's really early. So then, what experience do you want to have in sport? What experience do you want to have at school? Think about that. Don't think about what grades you're going to get, whether you're going to be the top team or not. That stuff doesn't matter, and you'll have some days where it kind of comes good and other days where it doesn't. But actually, how can you make the most of the opportunities and the experience along the way and enjoy the results when they come?
Fantastic. Well, we'll make sure we include the links to both the book and your social media, because you put some great stuff out on social media. But really enjoyed it today. Thank you so much for your time, Cath.
Thanks a lot, Kevin. Brilliant to be here with you.
Thank you again there, Cath, for an inspiring discussion. Some really pertinent questions there as we come off the back of a big period of reflection for everyone, whatever industry you're in. I've read that book twice now and I cannot recommend it enough. It is jam-packed with research, anecdotes, powerful stories and questions that really challenge your thinking. So make sure you check it out. The link we've included in the show notes. We've also included the link to Cath's website where you can find out more about the inspiring work she does. And finally, do make sure you connect with Cath on Twitter, as she's really active, posting insightful links and thoughts every week. Just again, we'd really appreciate it if you can give us a quick rate and review on whatever platform you're joining us on today, and please share the show with your friends. Our network is rapidly growing, with over 60 countries now joining us on a weekly basis. So thank you to everyone for spreading our stories, as we want to help as many people as possible. On to our next show, and it's travelling time, as we're joined by a guest from New Zealand, sharing his hugely energetic and inspiring story. Make sure you join us for that, and thanks for tuning in for another episode of the Rogue Monkey Podcast.